Events in time and space actually gravitate toward one another in much the same way matter does in physical space, which fundamentally shifts how we understand the very architecture of our lives. According to Bandel's Oak Matrix framework, specifically Anchor 15, we aren't just looking at random occurrences, but a gravitation of probabilities where large events act as attractors, pulling smaller, related moments into their orbit. This challenges the idea of time as a flat, linear progression, and instead suggests a landscape of high-resistance peaks and low-resistance conduits that actively shape our evolution.
It's a radical departure from the Newtonian view, where time is just a background stage. In the Oak Matrix, the focus shifts to how events create holes or gravity wells. Think about the way a massive star warps spacetime around it. Bandel argues that a major event, perhaps a life-changing decision, a cultural shift, or a profound realization, creates a similar warp in the probability field. This doesn't just happen in isolation, it creates a low-resistance path. Smaller, congruent events find it easier to pass through that same opening rather than fighting against the grain of the matrix. This is why we often see clusters of related synchronicities or streaks of luck or misfortune. They're literally being pulled into the wake of a larger probability attractor.
That concept of clustering feels very different from simple coincidence. You're saying these events aren't just happening at the same time, they're actively seeking the same path. But if these large events act like gravity wells, wouldn't that imply a loss of agency? If I'm caught in the gravitational pull of a massive event, am I just a passenger being dragged along?
That's exactly where the nuance of free will fractals comes in. In Anchor 15, Bandel is clear that while the gravitation exists, the paths themselves are fractal. Free will determines how tightly you orbit that attractor, whether you accelerate through the conduit or resist the pull. It's not mechanical, it's relational. You aren't a billiard ball being hit, you're more like a pilot navigating a current. The pressure of the cluster, what Bandel calls loving pressure, is designed to drive a quantum leap. The density of events builds up, and the oldest, most rigid patterns are the first to be crushed and transformed by that pressure. It's evolution through compression.
The term loving pressure is interesting because usually we associate high-pressure environments with stress or breakdown. But here, the breakdown seems to be the point, a necessary step for the quantum leap into higher coherence. It reminds me of the Rosicrucian and Hermetic ideas where everything is fundamentally vibration. If everything is source light oscillating, then this compression of events is really just a way of aligning frequencies.
Precisely. The extension of Anchor 15 touches on frequency cosmology. If we accept the Hermetic maxim that all is vibration, then events, matter, and even our individual consciousness are interference patterns of source light. Bandel describes a photon engine that drives these patterns within a sealed vessel. This vessel is the framework of our reality. When events cluster, it increases the frequency and intensity of the interference. You can either resist that frequency, which creates friction, or you can align with it. That alignment is what he describes as surrendering to the carrier wave, the hum that people sometimes perceive when they're in a state of direct awareness.
If this is literally source light oscillating and compressing, then our choices are essentially about frequency alignment. You mentioned 3 options: resisting, partially phasing, or fully surrendering. How does that manifest in everyday life? Does resisting look like trying to force a linear outcome when the matrix is pulling you toward a different cluster?
Resisting is essentially trying to maintain an old pattern when the gravity of a new probability well is already active. It feels like swimming upstream. You're fighting the low-resistance conduit. Partial phasing is when you acknowledge the change but try to negotiate with it, keeping one foot in the old world. But full surrender, which shouldn't be confused with passivity, is about aligning your personal vibration with the higher coherence that the cluster is trying to create. It's recognizing that the crushing of old patterns isn't a catastrophe, it's the removal of interference so the light can move more efficiently.
It strikes me that this framework turns the idea of karma on its head. In some of Bandel's other work, like Anchor 13, he mentions that karma isn't a punishment, but a loving cycle. If you combine that with this idea of event clustering, it suggests that recurring problems aren't bad luck. They're smaller events seeking the same hole because the lesson hasn't been passed through yet. The pressure builds until you finally make that quantum leap.
That's a vital connection. In the Oak matrix, if a lesson keeps coming back, it's because the probability well for that lesson is massive. It has a high gravitational pull. By the time you get to anchor 15, you start to see the mechanics of how that works. The oldest patterns are the first to transform because they are the densest. They are the most susceptible to the pressure of the influx. When a huge influx of new potential hits a cluster of events, it forces the system to reorganize into a higher state of order. It's recursive compression. The universe is essentially folding in on itself to see what can be refined.
So the hum is the direct perception of this process. In some mystical traditions, there's a reference to the music of the spheres, or a primordial sound. Bandel seems to be saying that this isn't just a metaphor, it's the actual oscillation of source light as it drives the photon engine.
It's entirely literal in this cosmology. The hum is the sound of the engine running. When you align your free will with the flow of events, when you stop resisting the whole or attractor, you move into phase with that frequency. The Oak matrix suggests that our evolution is the process of moving from fragmented, low-frequency interference patterns into high-coherence, unified light waves. Every event cluster is an opportunity to jump to that next level. It's like the universe is constantly trying to squeeze us into becoming diamonds.
Which brings us back to the anarchist knight concept Bandel explores elsewhere. To be a knight of your own destiny in this system means having the bravery to face that compression. You're not looking for external experts to tell you where to go. You're listening to the internal authority or the divine spark to know how to navigate the gravity wells. You become an active participant in the gravitation of probabilities rather than just a victim of circumstance.
And that's why he uses the analogy of the oak tree. The roots provide the stability. That's the grounding in the mechanics of the matrix, while the branches are the fractal paths of free will. You need both. Without the grounding, the pressure of the events would just shatter you. But with the roots of internal authority, that same pressure becomes the fuel for growth. You start to see the beauty in the clustering. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this attractor trying to pull me toward?
It's a shift from a clockwork universe to an organic, vibrating one. The mechanics aren't there to control us, they're there to facilitate a relational evolution. Even the instability of high-level elements like oganesson, which Bandel uses as a metaphor for manifestation, reflects this. Everything is in a state of constant becoming, leaping from one frequency to the next.
Exactly. Anchor 15 really emphasizes that we live in a sealed vessel of source light. There's nowhere for the energy to go but deeper into itself. That recursive nature is what creates the density we experience as matter and the sequence we experience as time. But if we can see through the density to the vibration underneath, the whole game changes. We realize that the gravity we feel in our lives, the weight of heavy events, is actually an invitation to transform.
If we look at the historical context of these ideas, they're deeply rooted in the Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century, like the Fama Fraternitatis. Those texts were circulating in a Europe fractured by religious war, and they offered a vision of a unified general reformation. Bandel is taking that same impulse, the desire to find a hidden order in the midst of chaos, and applying it to the modern world of quantum physics and information theory. He's demystifying the old mystery school traditions and turning them into a practical map for psychological maturity.
That's why he calls it organic Gnosticism. It's not about escaping the world or finding a secret key. It's about recognizing that the key is how you engage with the very fabric of reality. The gravitation of probabilities is a natural law, just like gravity. You don't need a priest or an expert to explain it once you start observing it in your own life. You just need to pay attention to where the events are clustering and how you're choosing to align with that movement.
It also explains why some periods of life feel so much more dense than others. If you're near a major attractor, the events come fast and they come in clusters. The pressure is high. During those times, the temptation is to resist, to try to slow things down. But according to the Oak matrix, that's exactly when you should be looking for the hole, the low-resistance conduit. Accelerating through it is often the safest and most transformative thing you can do.
It's like a pilot flying into a storm to find the eye. If you stay on the edges, you get battered. If you navigate toward the center of the pressure, you find the path through. That's the loving embrace of duality. The pressure isn't the enemy, the resistance to the pressure is. When the oldest patterns finally crush, it's because they can no longer hold the amount of light being pushed through the conduit. It's a system update for the soul.
The idea that everything is source light oscillating is ultimately a message of unity. If my interference pattern and your interference pattern are both part of the same photon engine, then we're never truly in competition. We're just different frequencies trying to find coherence. It takes the edge off the war between opposites and turns it into a dance of opposites, which I know is the title of one of Bandel's other books.
It's a high bar for bravery, though. Admitting that we are responsible for how we align with these frequencies means we can no longer play the victim of fate. If events are clustering around a certain probability well, we have to look at what we're doing to contribute to that orbit. It demands a level of honesty that most of us avoid, but the reward is that quantum leap, moving into a state where the hum isn't just a background noise, but a direct, lived experience of connection to the source.
In the end, Anchor 15 shows us that time isn't just something that happens to us. It's a medium we interact with. By understanding the gravitation of probabilities, we can stop being pawns in a mechanical universe and start being architects of our own evolution. We can see the holes in the matrix, not as obstacles, but as exits, or rather as entrances into a more coherent version of ourselves.
It's about moving from a linear struggle to a rhythmic flow. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start to recognize the clusters before they even fully manifest. You feel the pull of the attractor, and instead of fearing it, you adjust your frequency to meet it. That's the real power of the Oak matrix. It gives you the technical breakdown of the how and why, but it leaves the what, the actual choice of path, up to your own free will fractal.
It's a fascinating bridge between the ancient and the cutting edge. It treats the universe as a laboratory for soul development, where the periodic table, the laws of gravity, and the principles of light are all just tools in the service of awareness. It reminds us that even when life feels incredibly heavy and the events are piling up, that density is just a signal that we're on the verge of a major transformation.
And that transformation is the ultimate goal of the photon engine. It's not just running for the sake of running. It's driving us toward higher and higher levels of coherence until the interference patterns finally align perfectly with the source. That's the hum. That's the goal of the long game.
Understanding that we aren't just drifting through time, but are participants in a gravitational field of probabilities fundamentally changes the stakes of our daily choices. If you found this exploration of Anchor 15 and the Oak Matrix intriguing, consider sharing this discussion with someone who might be navigating their own cluster of events right now.